Welcome to the InfoSec Insider podcast, brought to you by URM, the UK's leading information and cybersecurity specialists.
Hi, my name's Annie and I'm here today with George Ryan, who's one of our consultants here at URM. Welcome to another episode of InfoSec Insider, Talk Cyber. So today, George and I are going to be talking about common cybersecurity failings that George sees in organisations he works with and the cyber threat landscape in general. So George, my first question for you is, according to the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology's 2024 Cyber Security Breaches Survey, almost half of businesses, 50%, have suffered a cybersecurity breach in the 2023 to 24 period. And the NCSC's incident management team have received almost 2,000 reports of cyber attacks in 2024. So are there any sort of common cybersecurity failings that you think lots of organisations have in their business that you think are contributing to making this problem so widespread?
Yeah, so absolutely. And I guess just off the back of that as well, something to consider is that some organizations may not have anything in place to actually know that they've been breached as well. And again, this is just working on the ones that have reported it, so the number could be higher. But yeah, so I think for organizations, the best way to look at their cyber at the moment is that you have kind of three things. You have your people, your processes, and your technologies. And kind of consistently across these, there are kind of common failures, which are kind of easy to fix, which would have a massive return in terms of your cybersecurity. So I guess starting with one of the most basic ones is multi-factor authentication. So that's kind of widespread now with a lot of cloud services offering it, but there are still a fair few organizations that aren't implementing this. Simply implementing it, which is often as easy as just clicking a button to say that it's required, will actually bring down a lot of attacks, because an attacker, for instance, may then actually need to have access to a code or something. So when you sign in, you get your little authenticator app comes on. That then requires you to put in a code to be verified. So just having something as simply as that is going to prevent a lot of attacks, because then and from an attacker perspective, you then need another thing to get hold of. Whereas if you don't have that in place, it's a lot easier to sign in. I think one of the other big things is kind of a lack of organizational knowledge about what you actually have out there. Because if you don't know what you have, then it's really hard to protect what you don't know. I think we've kind of seen it consistently across organizations of any size, really, that quite often when they do get hit, it can be things that they've completely forgotten they absolutely had. We've seen this in major organizations where they've had like a Amazon bucket that they've forgotten about, or some code on GitHub that they've just completely forgotten was a thing. And equally, this can happen to smaller organizations, which kind of leads on to the next point, that it's very easy. And I know when I've talked to organizations, it's quite difficult to see why you would be a target, because it's often kind of considered that people are only going to target specific companies. So, say you're in the financial sector, then you go, okay, we're potentially going to be a target here because people know we're dealing with money. But from experience, anyone is a target. We've seen stories in the news where there's been children's hospitals that have been a target. And I think the main thing to consider for organizations there is you're not necessarily specifically a target. They're not targeting you, but they're always scanning the internet to look for weaknesses. So you may not initially be on their radar, but if you have a weakness they know they can exploit, that can then put you on the radar. So it's definitely worth having that kind of viewpoint of, we could just fall under attack at any point. We could be a target, not because of what we do or who we are, but just because what we have out there may suddenly end up on someone's radar, and then you become a target. I think one of the other things is just regarding people, just the importance of effective security training. So security awareness are obviously massive, because no matter the size of your organization, one thing you're consistently going to have throughout is your people. And if we think of it back to the people's processes and technologies, they are a portion of attack. Sometimes it can be easier to completely evade going through the technology side to attack and actually going through the people themselves, which is why we see kind of the prevalence with phishing attacks. And when it comes to the security awareness training, I think it's so important for companies to not see it as kind of a tick box thing, which it can be in some cases. I know there are solutions out there which don't really aim to help the employee to understand, but just to show that they've done some training. Whereas actually, for organizations, it's really beneficial to look at security awareness to training that is effective, because this is going to benefit the organization, because there's going to be more chance of kind of having that culture of security awareness within the organization, and it benefits the employees, etc. as well, because those are practices that you may take when you go home. And obviously, if someone's more secure when they're at home, they're more likely to be secure in your office. It might be because that you could have millions of pounds in a technology solution, and that could all be brought down by a person that falls victim to a phishing attack. So simply just having your people effectively trained and aware, sometimes that can just be enough to completely prevent it. And yeah, effective security, at least annually, because it's always good to keep up to date. Recently we've seen quite a rise in people using QR codes for phishing. So you can't just have the same training that you've had last year. It's important to have that reflect the landscape that there is. And I guess aside from that as well, I think there's also the issue of, out-of-date software. And, completely get it, because it's really easy to kind of forget if you don't have something in place where you are consistently checking that you're up to date with your software. If you're not running vulnerability scans within the organization, you might not know that you've actually got some stuff which is very out of date and easy to exploit. Like from my experience when I was doing penetration testing, it'd be simple as seeing that they are using XYZ software in this version, and there are databases you can check that will then go, oh, okay, well, they've got this version. Well, that is weak to this exploit. Here's a script you can run that will then work on that. So for that one, it's just keeping up to date, making sure you are updating things, checking that things are still supported as well. Can be very easy, say with your firewalls, to not actually check if they're still receiving updates. You can easily believe that you're safe, and then actually it's got a massive exploit, which is, under attack, and then that's kind of leaving you weak without you even being aware. I guess the other one I'd mention as well is just with the supply chain. I think it's fair to say that a vast majority of businesses now will use other businesses for some part of their runnings. So that might be, that could be your payroll, HR, etc. And it's just so important to understand actually what your suppliers are doing as well. If you don't know their security practices, you don't know what they're doing with your data, how they delete it, then you can have all this stuff in your immediate organizational environment, but you're actually potentially weak from a breach happening there. And we've seen that there's been some massive ones like the Move It. I think it's Log4j as well. And it's just really keeping an eye on your suppliers you're using. And likewise, if you stop using a supplier, just making sure that things have been deleted from their end. Because that is then allowing another vector into your company as such. So I think, to sum up, there's a fair few things, but they're not massively difficult things that you can do. It's again, across your people's process and technology, and there's things that you can do to bolster up each one that aren't actually too much of an investment. Like, you don't need to be looking at spending millions on the latest cybersecurity tool, when in a lot of cases effectively training your employees, employing your MFA, and having knowledge of your third parties as such is going to make you a lot safer, which is a really good kind of return on investment for organizations.
I think you've already begun to allude to this, but is this going to get worse looking to the future? So, the NCSE, just to throw another statistic at you, the NCSE's IM team saw a 16% increase in the number of cyber incidents that needed their support in the last year. And we've got, such a rapidly evolving technological landscape, especially in the area of AI. So do you think this upward trend in the number of cyber attacks is going to continue as we go forward?
Yeah, so absolutely. I think we're using technology for everything. So the more we use it, the more attack opportunities there are. It's always a game of cat and mouse. Like there will be people that argue with AI, we're safer now because we have better defenses. But on the flip side of that, because we have AI, attacks are actually easier to get for people that potentially aren't as technological. So like we've seen this with phishing kits online as such with AI. So this is just where it can like kind of convert it to a different language, which would make sense in said language. In some cases, all you have to do is download the kit and use that, which then opens these up to less technological criminals, people that previously would have been kind of frozen out from that attack because they don't have the facilities or the technical knowledge. So yeah, it's definitely something that I think will continue to go upwards, and it kind of has to essentially because we are becoming more technological, where everything is using more IT, there's more cyber involved, there's going to be more opportunities. Any new cyber thing that comes out, well, everyone knows nothing's impenetrable. So any new thing that comes out is going to bring new opportunities for attackers. You think now where we are in a position where someone can start a business simply off an iPad. That's all they need, and that can be their business. There's no need for a physical office. There's no need for these things. And where we're having new businesses pop up because of that, well, the only way to really attack them is through the cyber element. And I just think, yeah, that in combination with just how much we've moved online, I can only see there being an increase in the number of incidents.
What the NCSE's also said that the overwhelming majority of cyber attacks don't pose a technical challenge at the moment. Obviously, that may change as we look to the future. But in terms of the here and now, most of them rely on techniques and vulnerabilities that we know well. So what can organizations do to protect themselves against these attacks that we can protect against?
One of the big things for organizations to start with is to understand what they have. Like we said earlier, if you don't know what you have, you don't know how you can protect it. You've got to have it to be able to protect it. So things like having your asset register and having all your assets listed, well, now you've got them there, you can start looking at how you can protect each one. For a lot of organizations, it's beneficial to start off with their cyber essentials, because what this is doing, and obviously it's not going to be the end goal because the end goal is always to continuously improve. What it does allow you to do is to actually get a foundation and a baseline within the organization. Because the questions that you'll be asked with your cyber essentials to be able to be compliant with that are going to force you to look into the different areas. So you're going to have to be looking at, say, your firewall setup, whether you do have MFA, how are you keeping admin accounts different to non-admin accounts, just listing the assets that you do have. And it's kind of this thing that is going to start to make an organization have a kind of holistic view of what they have on offer. Because the problem is, if you go into securing yourself and you don't have an established program like Cyber Essentials is, you may fall guilty of not really covering certain areas. Whereas at least if you start with your Cyber Essentials, that's going to give you that whole kind of knowledge of the organization. You've got a good, solid starting point, and it's going to address a lot of issues straight off the bat. And that, from there, you can then look into specific areas potentially where you are weaker, but without having that whole knowledge, you're just not going to know where you are kind of falling foul. I think so the government actually did a report on the impact of Cyber Essentials. So that was from DCIT who did that one. And they found that more than half of Cyber Essentials users, Cyber Essentials was actually their only form of external assurance for cybersecurity. And I think, as everyone knows, you wouldn't, as an accountant, mark your own homework. So when it comes to your cyber security, you probably should be looking for some form of external assurance, because it's very easy to fall into the bias, but actually you've got a thing here you can mark against. And furthermore to that finding, they actually found that those that had never obtained Cyber Essentials, 72% were not using any other security scheme, standard, or principle, which again can leave you very in the dark if you're not sure exactly what you're doing regarding cybersecurity. In terms of the feedback from Cyber Essentials, it's been very good, with senior management, 86% of those saying it's strengthened their understanding of the risks posed by cyber attacks, which again is really good, because there can be a discrepancy where you may have your IT team who completely understand the cybersecurity risks, etc. But it can be very hard to word that in a way for senior management to understand and therefore act upon. Whereas, with the scheme, you're marked against it. It's very easy to see how your cybersecurity is. Equally, like we said earlier, just having the scheme is going to allow you to then grow from the scheme. So again, in the report, it's found that 76% who had taken additional preventive actions beyond the cybersecurity technical controls. And I think the thing to take away from that is that actually the Cyber Essentials here is giving the grounding for many organizations to understand their cybersecurity, for them to take it further. Whereas potentially you've got the issue that without this initial grounding in it and not having your baseline, you don't really know how to take it further. Because cybersecurity, like we said earlier, you've got your people, processes, your technologies. Could be very easy for an organization who have no standards, schemes, or principles or anything like that in place to see a bit of technology on the web and assume that that's going to do what they need to do for them. So, again, you could have this millions of pound technology, but then no focus on the people or your processes in place in the organization. So while it's great this technology is doing its bit, you've then got two areas where you're potentially falling weak. What can we do to protect ourselves from these threats? I think looking towards a scheme like Cyber Essentials to get that foundational knowledge of your cybersecurity, and then to branch out as required. And for Cyber Essentials, it's a good one as well, because there are a lot of smaller organizations who may be thinking, well, where do we start? I've worked in small organizations where it's 6 people, and you're thinking, okay, we've got this many people, we don't have an IT team, we can't do this, I'm not going to be able to do this, I don't know where to start, I don't know who to hire, what do we do here? Whereas with something like Cyber Essentials, you go, okay, here's a Cyber Essentials guidance, which is free. You don't need to have Cyber Essentials to look at the guidance, which again, if, I'd recommend looking at that just to, get some general knowledge on what you should do. But just having the scheme in place is going to allow you to know what you need to work on, where you fall weak. It's just important to get that, basic foundational knowledge of where your organization stands, regardless of size, and then work from there. Equally with the Cyber Essentials, if it comes to doing the Cyber Essentials Plus, that includes a vulnerability scan. So again, that's ticking off that thing from earlier of actually seeing, do we have any software that's outdated, or we got any vulnerabilities that we're not even aware of?
I think that's a really good point, George, that Cyber Essentials, it puts it on a plate for you. It demystifies, it tells you what you need to do. And because of that, it's a great starting point for organizations that are at the beginning of their cybersecurity journey. because it tells you what you need to do.
And it's a respected one. I know, I can't remember the exact stat, but I think DCIT was saying as well, like there's a lot of suppliers that will be looking towards using people that have, say, Cyber Essentials or ISO 27001, because if I'm going to a supplier and I don't know what kind of certifications you've got, I'm reliant on your words to an extent on what you do. Whereas at least here again, it's knowing, well, I know they're certified to Cyber Essentials, they are at least doing this, this, and this. Which is another important thing to consider.
Thank you so much for your time, George. It's been great chatting to you today. And for any of our listeners that want to learn a bit more about this topic, we've got a really great blog on our website, urmconsulting.com, called Mitigating Cyber Risks, Why Cyber Essentials Matters More Than Ever. So I definitely recommend you go and check that out. And thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we would really appreciate it if you could spare a moment to leave a rating or review at ratethispodcast.com/InfoSec Insider. To listen to more episodes, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Podbean.
Thank you for listening to URM's InfoSec Insider podcast. For more information, visit our website at urmconsulting.com.